Hi, friends. Logan Clements here with the Better Events podcast. And in this week's episode, we are talking all about celebrating the Black community in events. This week, we have a special guest, Keneisha Williams, who is the founder of Black in Events Network. And we sit down to talk with her about what the network even is. What does she hope for the diversity in the event industry as we move forward, to talking about how we as planners can be more inclusive in events. And, the most important part, even hiring more Black professionals in events. This is an episode chock full of tangible tips. It's really important if you are someone who works in events, because I feel like our mission is always to create more inclusive spaces. And this episode should hopefully help you start to be on that route to creating more inclusive events and just behind the scenes at your next event as well. So enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Better Events podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events podcast. I'm Logan Clements, one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson. And this week, we're very enthusiastic. I'm trying to use a different word than excited, because excitement is constant. For this week's discussion, we're going to be talking all about celebrating the Black community and events. We have a lovely guest here that we want to save as much time for. So I'm just going to jump right in, and I'm going to introduce Keneisha Williams is the founder of the Black in Events Network and has been in events for the past 12 years. She strives to create space, amplification, and pathways to success for marginalized communities. Keneisha has been seen in Forbes, and in 2021 was named top 100 most influential people in the events industry and top 10 most influential women in the events industry. Most recently, she has been recognized by Meeting Net magazine as a 2022 changemaker. Wow. Keneisha, welcome to the podcast. Is there anything you want to add to that lovely introduction?
No. It's always weird hearing your bio read back to you. It's one of those things, but thank you.
And we're just excited to have you. And Keneisha, we love to do a little why we asked our guests. And I wanted to take this away because Keneisha and I have had the pleasure of working together in the past. And so I remember hearing, when we were introduced, I remember hearing around that time that you were mentioned in Forbes, I think. And so I was like, oh, I gotta look up Keneisha. I gotta see what she's involved in. I just thought that was really cool. And then I saw that you were, and heard more about that you were involved with the Black in Events Network. And so as I was thinking through our podcast today, I'm just really excited to be able to talk to you in this capacity. I feel like we haven't had some of these conversations, and so it's going to be really amazing. And I think our listeners are also going to be interested to hear how we can create more inclusive spaces at events. And so, as Logan said, we're enthusiastic about the topic today. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, definitely. And so we'll just kind of start with some questions, and we like to start basic. And I would love to start at a place where we are just learning about you and your involvement with the event industry. Mm-hmm. And so tell us about you. What's your day-to-day like with events? What projects are you working on? And then I want to also hear what your favorite event to be involved in is. So I know that was a lot. So wherever you want to take that question.
Sure. I will. You know what? Right now I'm working on a couple conferences. Like many people, I've been doing a lot of virtual stuff for the past 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was really a full-timer in the events industry, working in a corporate space. So, the transition to virtual was not necessarily different, but it was all obviously a bigger change because it became more consistent. However, during the time of jumping into this virtual space and doing events, I know that I'd wanted to continue doing more things and contribute more to the events industry. So, the time that I'm spending now is, spent on helping with Black in events, but also doing some events here and there. I just recently, literally, ladies, this year only started going back to in-person live events. So the first time on the floor, I was like, oh my gosh. It was like culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was insane. So it was nice. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing lately.
We hear you that with making the transition back to in person. I know it's like reteaching yourself to ride a bike. I feel like it'll come back to you, but definitely
Exactly.
some culture shocks there. But can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what the Black in Events Network is, like the mission and who is it for?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. So, the Black in Events Network is my second child, so to speak. It's really a platform and a source that recognizes and amplifies Black professionals contributing to the events industry. And it's really here to support Black professionals, but also other diverse communities through pathways of opportunity that will amplify their career and business success. And we usually do this through, or we're working to do this through a couple pillars, which includes educational, financial, social, and wellness opportunities. And we think those are kind of the streams that will help to bridge and build success for diverse or marginalized communities. So one of the major things that we've tackled so far is continuing to work and create space, community, that hot word right now, where we can start addressing issues of visibility while also fostering representation. So we've hosted a couple educational seminars, some really cool campaigns, and we have our eyes right now on some other streams that will hopefully help to close the gap between marginalized communities and the events industry at whole. So, I think the success comes from, knowing, the challenges that diverse communities encounter in the industry and just working to continuously address them through strategic solutions.
That's amazing. And I really love the pillars. I wasn't familiar with those. And so when you said that, I was like, that just makes sense. Like it makes it more tangible in a way to bring results for the community. And so I just think that's so cool. And I have more questions about that. But what I was wondering too is with the event industry, obviously you created this group because there's a need. And so with the event industry, where do you feel like it's lacking and where does it need to develop in this sense or in general? Once again, wherever you want to take that question.
No, that's a great question. So, as the world at the moment, we're starting, especially in the events world, let's talk about that. We're really shifting back to live events. Live events are really high in demand right now. We're becoming super busy. However, the importance is still about, addressing the issues that live in our event ecosystem. So those issues are lack of diversity, lack of equity, lack of, inclusion. Those things are still happening. And we saw earlier on in the pandemic where this issue started to come to light, started to become more of a trend. It was just being discussed on every platform. It was being discussed. It was being written about. And then you kind of start to see it slowly trickle down. I'm not saying that there are not organizations and individuals out here still striving to maintain that, but it starts to get quieter. So my thing is, we need to work on still addressing those issues actively. So, and primarily because it affects all of us. These issues affect all of us, whether we see it or not, right? And for me, the first part we have to start on is education and understanding, the issues and also the value in supporting DEI efforts. From there, it's like building a strategy, implementing it, and then staying the course. The most challenging thing that I find for a lot of people is just staying the course of their commitment to DEI, because it's one of those things, if it's not ingrained in us, if it's not a habit, we tend to fall out of that fire that we feel we need to do to accomplish it. But we have to stick to it. We have to have accountability. We have to have teams. So, those are some of the things that have concern with, but hope that, we kind of continue the momentum with.
And Keneisha, with your work with the Black in Events Network, are you focused more on trying to have more representation on the planner, organizer, the people working the event side, or the attendee side, or both? Is it kind of where are you seeing kind of that focus right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest with you, it really comes from the behind the scenes. I'm not too concerned with what we do outside at the moment, and I'll kind of say this because whatever we do on the inside is going to reflect on the outside. It's kind of like eating healthy, right? So when we work on the things that are the problems in the events industry, like lack of representation in our teams, lack of representation in the venues that we use, the foods that we select, the companies that we work with, when we start addressing those things, we'll start seeing a change in even the people that attend to our events. If you're planning an event and you have, you know, one dominant group, it doesn't matter who it is, one dominant group planning something without the perspectives of others, you start lacking what you can possibly attract to that event that you're doing. So it's really important to start from the inside, or in events backstage, and work your way through. But again, these things take time, and I completely understand that we're all in different journeys of this. So, but when we start like just in that small space, like what does our team look like? Whose views are we sharing? You start to see progress in that.
That makes a lot of sense. So yeah, thank you for touching more on that. And then, as you know, a lot of our listeners are involved in events in a lot of different capacities, but let's kind of focus in on event planners for a moment. So how can we as event planners plan more inclusive events? What are some tips and tricks that you have for us?
Yeah, for sure. So I won't get too complex with you all, but the one thing is really the simplest place to start is by diversifying our suppliers list. Kind of like what I touched on earlier. Adding additional planners to your team from different backgrounds, different places of life. And when I talk about Black in events, I'm not just saying Black professionals. There are people with disabilities. There are people that can bring so much to our team, to our perspective, when we just kind of loosen the band a little bit and look outside our windows type of thing, right? So, when you talk about suppliers list, like who are the venues that you're working with? Who's on the teams of the venues that you're working with? Sometimes we don't think about those things, right? The AV companies that you're working with, the decor companies that you're working with, the food companies that you work with. These are just some places that we can start looking. And, I've worked, and I know a lot of people who don't even identify as being from a marginalized community, who say, you know what, if I'm working with a venue and their team is not diverse, I don't work with them. And these are the ways, like, when you start hitting people's pockets, things change. So if larger organizations are seeing that, okay, you know what, planners are not really working with us. Why is that? It's because your team is not diverse. You're not showing fair representation of what the world outside looks like, right? So when we start kind of making those strategic moves, we do see change. We see organizations saying, okay, well, clearly we need to fix this, because people are saying, they don't want to work with us because we're not diverse enough. We don't have, better perspective. So those are things that we can do. It seems kind of tough, but tough love, I guess, right? And, as planners, the events that we put on, it reflects the world almost. Events are universal. So why are we not working in that way? Another thing, do your research. I always tell people to network, build relationships, and don't build relationships just because, like, build genuine relationships, right? And most importantly, it's giving the opportunity of chance, right? Sometimes it's really hard to open up the door to what is unfamiliar. However, a lot of the times, the best connections, the best opportunities come from stepping outside of our comfort zone, right? It's like taking risks almost. So a lot of us, we rely on our core network, which may be already booked. They're super busy. Well, there are a lot of other people, a lot of other communities that have no one knocking on their doors, right? So the more we kind of the more we step outside of what we're comfortable with, what looks familiar, start to see more change. You start to see more inclusive events. And again, it starts from behind the stage.
I feel like a common kind of cop out folks will be is they want to diversify, but they can't find the people, or they find it, which I think is always, like you're saying, your point about research is really just kind of the easier answer. Because you do tend to see teams, especially behind the scenes, like you're saying, back of house, it is a lot of folks who look the same. Why? Because probably the person who hired them looked like them,
Right.
whether it was gender or racial or, socioeconomic. That's just kind of where they're coming from. But talking about doing the research and doing the work, like what's a good research for folks who are looking to hire more Black professionals in events?
That's also a great question. And I want to kind of roll back really quickly to something that you said. And, you kind of tapped on like the unconscious bias. And that's something we all have. Every single one of us have that. We are all automatically engraved to respond to what looks familiar to us, right? Based on our cultural backgrounds, where we were raised, it's natural. But the psychological part of that is really tapping in and realizing, okay, I'm getting into this familiar place. How am I going to roll back and change that? So I wanted to touch on that because, a lot of people, I don't want to bring shame to it because we all have unconscious bias, right? It's just addressing it and realizing it in ourselves that, okay, we need to make a change here within ourselves. So, and can you go back to the question?
Unconscious bias, very important.
Yeah.
But just thinking for listeners to this podcast who do have some of that power in those hiring decisions or the people they select for their team, or even to your point of diversifying your supplier list, like what's a good resource for folks who are looking to hire more Black professionals in events?
Perfect. So I'm going to shamelessly say Black in Events Network, obviously, right? But there are so many other platforms that is similar to the work that we do. One thing that we have aimed to do, and that I can't tell you how many times during the pandemic that came up where I don't know where to look. And I'm just like, look in your backyard, like look in LinkedIn. There is millions of people on there that you can find. It's not that hard. However, I get it. We don't always have the time to do that. But every February, Black in Events puts on a 100 highlights. So what that is throughout the month of February, we literally list 100 Black professionals working in the events industry. So we've done it 2 years already. 2023 will be our third year. We get submissions from all over. Like last year we got somebody from like Saudi Arabia. We like, you name it, we're getting submissions for people to be recognized. So, when I hear that argument, I'm like, come again, because we're here. It's just doing the research and we do the work. We find people. Sometimes people submit names to us, but we find those names and those people who are actually out here doing it. Are they all planners? No. Some of them are doing decor. Some of them are doing AV work, but we find them and we post them and share them. So, and the messaging in that is to say, hey, we are here, just do the work. And we're doing part of it. There are a lot of platforms, especially during the pandemic, that listed out, venues that are of diverse communities that you could work with, food vendors. So they're there. If you kind of just do a quick Google search, they're at your fingertips almost. So, I always say just kind of look where you are and ask questions and form those relationships. But, if that doesn't work, then go on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is the space that allows us to not make any excuses. Whether you're, there's so much opportunities to network on there and really, tap on somebody's inbox and say, hey, can we have a quick Zoom meet and just have a conversation, see where someone is at. I know we're all busy at this point, but it doesn't hurt to build those relationships.
Keneisha, it sounds like we might have to tap into you for some folks to interview on future podcast episodes.
Anytime.
Yeah, and we were having a conversation with a past guest, and she was mentioning like having the right people in the room, if you will, for the planning process too. So it's like if you're going to be doing a themed event, to make sure that that community that you're going for is there, helping you make sure that you actually represent it well and correctly and respectfully and all of those things. And so with that in mind, or any other examples, what's something that you want event planners that are not BIPOC to know or to be more aware of when planning events? And I know we've talked about a lot of things, but if there's any other thoughts or ideas that you have for that.
Although, like I mentioned, although the subject of DEI has kind of quieted down, I want to really stress that it's still important and to continue pushing the dialogue in your programming. Despite the demand of events being high, still have, whether you're having Black planners do contract work, whether they're full-time, tap on people and ask questions, right? We're in a place right now where the economy is just going insane and it's affecting everyone, right? So, really get in there and ask questions, and whether, that means you have to talk to people that, aren't necessarily from your community. It kind of goes back to just taking that risk. And, I want to really say, and one important thing that I want to touch on that I missed saying earlier to you all is that, when we're doing this work and we're looking to hire like diverse pools of people and we're looking to build relationships, it's really vital to have workplace culture that is welcoming, but also implements and follows through on, equity, right? So a lot of the times we want to do the work and we want to hire people that are from diverse communities, but we're not so welcoming when we get on the inside. So you want to have a space that really nurtures and ensures that differences can thrive and not feel ostracized. So, I think that's something that people have to take into consideration, because too often we build like this really pretty facade, and then when you get in, it's just nothing like that. So we have to be mindful of those things and really ask questions and form communities even in our teams and in our workplaces, so that we're keeping the narrative going and we're understanding people's experiences, if that makes sense. So, I think it's a lot more than, recruiting, etc. It's actually wanting to put in the time and effort to ensure that your space is welcoming.
And Keneisha, if you don't mind, I'd love to dive in, just if we have a couple more, like just some examples for our listeners of what that looks like. Again, I'm a white woman, so for me, I don't necessarily feel it like, at being white, I tend to be on the majority of event teams, but I've definitely felt it in production, where as a female, I'm usually in the minority. And things that have made me feel excluded from a space can be the language they're using, the jokes that are being made on headset, because it's all men usually. And so things that I've been cognizant of when I'm putting together teams and trying to make sure, they're more inclusive. But that's from my experience. And again, as a white woman, I haven't felt it. But do you have any, examples or things that people should be like hyper aware of, and to fight back against some of those unconscious biases that like you said, we all have?
Yeah, it's definitely I would definitely start in just creating space, and there's a lot of companies right now where you have like task force that's happening in the company, and it could be led by anyone, but it helps to keep accountability of what's happening. And of course, it's putting in the effort and the time and the money into some of maybe the trainings. A lot of the times these things come down to education. So if a company just wants to hire a consulting firm to come in and talk to, their coworkers, because that starts to bring a conscious awareness, like, oh, they're taking this seriously. And that becomes something across the board where everyone starts to realize, okay, we have to actually work towards this. So I think it's, really taking the time to educate your staff, but also taking the time to listen. So this is one of the key things that, it sounds so simple, but it goes a long way, and it's a listening. So if you do have employees or team members that's on your team, it's having listening to what they're saying. Sometimes as women, we go through this, right? Where your hand is up at the table, and if the room is filled with more men on the table, a lot of the times your voice is drowned out. So that sometimes doubles when you are a Black woman, right? It's like even harder to be seen, even harder to be heard. So, ensuring that there's a place at the table where everybody can be heard, and that comes back into having communities or spaces in that organization where people can have those open dialogues. A couple summers ago, we had a reading club, and it was just about reading. There's a book called Reading for Race, and that was where people just came together and talked about, in a safe space, of course, racial issues and conversations, and had that open dialogue where we were able to learn more and meeting people and meeting everyone at this journey wherever they are, because we're all on different journeys when it comes to this topic. We're not in the same space, and it's respecting that, I think. So to say the least, it's really education, it's building space, it's listening, and also being open to the changes that are going to come, because a lot of the times people are not open to these things. And the more we become open to, these changes, the easier, I'm saying that very lightly, we start to make progress. So, those are kind of, I know it sounds simple, but it's work. Those things are work. So that would be my advice to everyone. And there's so many resources online, to read from and learn from, where, if you're having questions, if you're having doubts, search resources online.
These are some really wonderful, tangible tips. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I know our listeners do as well. And one of the things, so the podcast, any listeners that we have listening, usually we're getting to a point where it's a good amount, which we're so grateful for. And so because we're privileged to have this community of listeners, how can our listeners help spread the word and create more inclusive spaces for the Black community and the Black in Events Network? Like, is it something that we could resource to, or just any ideas that you have for anybody that's listening out there, how they can support these efforts?
Absolutely. The one thing that I always say about Black in Events is that it's super inclusive. So I've had a couple of my American counterparts say to me, is it because you're from Canada? But I built this platform to be welcoming to everybody. So, we want people that don't look like us to be in this space, because how do you move forward just looking at the same people, right? You can't. We have to be doing this together. That's how you're going to learn. That's how I'm going to learn. So what we do is really invite people to be part of this space. Follow us on social media, and not just our community, but other communities that don't look like you. Follow those communities, share the information with your own networks, and that helps spread the word. That helps spread momentum, right? And keep that conversation going. And I believe those are the small things that help us to grow, right? And if you can't even contribute financially to institutions or organizations that's trying to make change, at least share the knowledge and support the things that those organizations and those communities are doing. It really goes a long way.
Keneisha, thank you so much for, all of your knowledge that you've shared, and more about the Black Events Network. What Black and Events Network, we'll link in our show notes, so listeners, you can take those action items she said right now and follow. Is there anything else you want to add for our listeners today?
You know what? I would say just really wherever you are in your journey of DEI, just continue on that journey, and don't be too hard on yourself, but really consciously make that decision in your mind to work towards being part of the change. Every small bit counts. Right now I'm reading the book Atomic Habits, and in that book they really talk about just that 1% change, and the more we do it consistently, if we do a piece of it every day and chip at it, you'll see so much of a difference in the next year. So, just keep the dialogue going, and like what you ladies are doing is amazing, to continue that conversation and have open dialogue.
Thank you so much. And thanks for being here with us. We've learned so much, and we do like to end with something we call sentence finishers. And so we're going to put you on the spot for a minute. These are just for fun, but you can go ahead and fill in the blank. So your favorite quality in a manager is?
Genuine relationships.
I like us. That's good. Yes, I like that.
There's no wrong answers here.
Yeah,
These are all
okay,
all helpful. My favorite productivity tool is.
Ooh, my favorite productivity tool. Can I say Alexa? Okay. Definitely.
Yes.
She's become my best friend. I kid you not. But really, I'm a Google person, and I use spreadsheets, and it always gets the job done for me.
I totally agree with that one. I feel deeply about it. So, once again, no right or wrong answers, but yes. And then our last one is something that you're looking forward to this year, whether business or personal, is.
I would say I'm going to Banff in a couple weeks, so I've never been there, and I've heard it's pretty nice. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Keneisha, thank you so much. And can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Absolutely. So I am avidly on Twitter. My name on there is Get K Will. I'm also on Instagram, not very often, but I do post from time to time, and it's also Get K Will. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I have a website called it's www.keneisha.co. You can find me there. And Black and Events is the handle at Black and Events on most major platforms.
Great. We'll link to all of those in the show notes for you listeners so you can, again, easily keep up with Keneisha and all that she's doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies, for having me. It was great. Had fun.
And that brings us to our end of the episode. Before we go, one of our favorite segments of the bonus tip. Mary, you have our bonus tip this week.
Yes, I do. Okay, so our bonus tip for today. This is one that I would say, Logan, I'm going to put words in your mouth that we feel really passionately about. So make backup plans. And once again, we've talked about this, but I wanted to kind of hit it home again because something I like to do is have a specific meeting with my clients to like the week of the event, and I call it like a doomsday planning session. This is where we talk about all the things that could go wrong, and they're usually like outrageous, but it's good to have a plan. And so that's what we do in those sessions. And an example I wanted to share with you is we were doing a walkathon type of event around a route. And we heard that there was a water main issue and that they had to do construction on the route. So we were going to have to completely change our route, which was a big deal. We learned about this the week of the event. And long story short, they ended up delaying construction, thankfully. But just in case, I was like, I don't know, like there's not a lot we can do in this scenario. So what we're going to do is we're going to select a turnaround point. We're going to put volunteers there. They're going to dress up in construction gear, and we're going to have them hold signs and cheer as people get to the turnaround point. So we're going to make this terrible situation something kind of like awkward and funny, because that's all that we could do with that. And so I came to the event prepared with those items in case that had to happen. And so this is just your friendly reminder to make sure that you create backup plans. So that's your bonus tip for today.
Yeah. And I mean, Mary, you got a Halloween costume out of it, I guess, there of having some construction outfits. Yeah, we love our backup plans. I mean, I feel like we've said this in a number of episodes, but the whole point of having them is so that you don't have to use them. And if you don't make them or talk about them, then you'll probably wish you did. So doomsday planning session or backup plans. I love it, Mary. And that brings us to the end of our episode. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Better Events Pod. You can send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. And as always, we appreciate you for listening, sharing it with your networks, and coming back for more every single Wednesday. We'll be back in your feeds again next week.